Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda bersama saya Nabilah, Khaleeda, dan ini Niaga AWANI. Banyak yang akan kita bincangkan pada hari ini, namun kita buka dengan perbincangan berkenaan dengan Malaysia baru-baru ini mencatat satu pencapaian membanggakan apabila menduduki tempat pertama dunia dalam Open Data Inventory mengatasi hampir 200 negara dari segi keterbukaan data. Namun persoalan yang lebih besar ialah, adakah data yang terbuka ini benar-benar membantu menghasilkan dasar yang lebih baik, dan kerana pada akhirnya data saja tidak menyelesaikan masalah, sebaliknya dasar yang baik yang menentukannya. Jadi bersama kita untuk membincangkan perkara ini ialah Dr. Azizi Abu Bakar, pengelola data bagi Open Science serta pegawai pendidik di Pusat Pembangunan Lestari Universiti Melaya UMSDC. Dr. Azizi, terima kasih kerana bersama dengan kami. Mungkin kalau kita nak buka perbincangan kita, soalan pertama saya ialah kita lihat Malaysia kini berada di nombor 1 dunia dalam keterbukaan data. Tapi persoalannya, adakah pembuat dasar di Malaysia sebenarnya benar-benar menggunakan data ini secara berkesan, ataupun kita sebenarnya hanya bagus dalam menerbitkan set data itu sendiri? Silakan Doktor.
Pencapaian ini memang sangat membanggakan kerana ia menunjukkan Malaysia telah membina satu infrastruktur dalam data terbuka yang lebih kukuh. Namun cabaran sekarang ini ialah bukan pada dasar yang terbuka sahaja, tapi kita perlu pastikan data ini benar-benar digunakan dalam proses membuat dasar. So dalam banyak keadaan kita masih lagi pada tahap menerbitkan set data. So, tapi belum sepenuhnya kita memanfaatkan data tersebut untuk dianalisis dan untuk dijadikan sebagai penilaian dasar secara sistematik. Jadi langkah seterusnya apa yang saya lihat, ia perlu untuk diperkukuhkan budaya evidence-based policy making supaya ia menjadi asas kepada keputusan dasar dan bukan sekadar pada simbol keterbukaan sahaja.
Tapi walaupun pencapaian ini memberangsangkan, kan Doktor, kita lihat masih terdapat kekurangan data dalam beberapa bidang penting, mungkin termasuk jenayah sebagai contoh, ataupun keganasan berasaskan gender. Kita juga dapat saksikan kekurangan pada hasil kesihatan dan juga data pelepasan karbon. Jadi sejauh mana kekurangan data ini menyukarkan kerajaan merangka dasar yang betul-betul berkesan?
Okey, memang kekurangan dilaporkan pencapaian kita itu terdapat kekurangan data dalam bidang kritikal yang boleh menyukarkan kerajaan untuk memahami skala sebenar sesuatu masalah tersebut. Sebagai contohnya, kita yang dilaporkan itu adalah data yang terperinci kurang dari aspek keganasan berasaskan gender maupun pelepasan karbon. So dasar yang dirangka mungkin kalau kita menggunakan data tersebut ia akan menjadi tidak tepat. Data yang lengkap membantu untuk membuat dasar mengenai pasti punca masalah tersebut. So, sektor yang terlibat serta kawasan yang memerlukan intervensi segera tidak dapat dilihat secara sepenuhnya. So, jadi keterbukaan data ini perlu disertai dengan kelengkapan dan juga kualiti data tersebut supaya dasar yang dirangka tersebut boleh benar-benar berasaskan bukti. Seperti mana yang saya maklumkan tadi, evidence-based policy making.
Tapi dalam penulisan Dr. Azizi juga kita ada lihat dibangkitkan soal reproducibility, iaitu apabila data tersedia tetapi metodologi ataupun cara data itu dihasilkan tidak dinyatakan dengan jelas ataupun telus. Jadi adakah keadaan ini sebenarnya boleh menjejaskan keyakinan terhadap dasar yang kononnya berasaskan data, ataupun Doktor ada pandangan lain?
Pada pandangan saya, metod untuk data itu dibuat secara terbuka ada. Cumanya tidak dibuka secara untuk dizahirkan kepada umum. So, reproducibility memang sangat penting dalam ekosistem data terbuka. Kalau kami di data steward di Universiti Melaya, di atas platform Universiti Melaya Open Science, kami bergantung kepada satu prinsipal, iaitu FAIR principle, iaitu findable, accessible, interoperable dan juga reproducibility. So part reproducibility ini perlu ada dalam sebagai prinsip untuk melaksanakan data terbuka. So jika data tersedia itu tapi tanpa metodologi itu dizahirkan atau tidak dijelaskan secara telus kepada umum, maka ia sukar untuk dijadikan sebagai satu rujukan pada masa akan datang supaya ia dapat digunakan pada kajian yang selanjutnya. So oleh itu keterbukaan data ini perlu disertai dengan ketelusan metodologi dan dokumentasi yang jelas supaya analisis itu boleh disemak, dengan erti kata lain diuji dan juga diperbaiki secara terbuka.
Dengan pencapaian ataupun penganugerahan yang membanggakan dengan Malaysia mendapat tempat pertama ini, secara realitinya kita lihat ramai dalam kalangan masyarakat masih sukar faham ataupun gunakan data tersebut. Jadi persoalannya doktor, adakah Malaysia sebenarnya mempunyai ekosistem data terbuka tetapi belum lagi mempunyai masyarakat yang celik dari segi data ini?
Saya melihat dari aspek itu, ia merupakan satu realiti yang perlu kita akui. So, Malaysia pada hakikatnya sekarang ni kita telah membina ekosistem data terbuka yang sangat baik dan dari segi infrastruktur. Tetapi tahap literasi data dan juga masyarakat masih perlu diperkukuhkan lagi. So, data hanya boleh memberi manfaat jika masyarakat, terutamanya penyelidik, media dan organisasi masyarakat awam mampu untuk tafsirkan data tersebut dan menggunakannya dengan betul. So, oleh itu pendidikan literasi ini pada khidmat saya, ia perlu untuk diperkasa supaya data tersebut benar-benar menjadi alat untuk memperkukuhkan dalam proses pembentukan dasar negara kita.
Kita juga lihat Malaysia jelas telah bina ataupun kukuhkan infrastruktur data. Tapi kalau selepas ini kan kita nak tahu what's next untuk Malaysia ataupun apa langkah seterusnya. Dan apa juga mungkin informasi atau perubahan yang perlu dilakukan supaya data terbuka ini benar-benar dapat diterjemahkan kepada dasar yang lebih baik dan juga berkesan untuk mungkin jaga sederhana dan jaga panjang.
Bagi saya, ianya memerlukan beberapa perkara. Antaranya ialah data yang berkualiti dan dikemaskini secara konsisten. Maknanya kita perlu teruskan pencapaian kita ada. Dan keduanya ialah kerjasama lebih rapat di antara penyelidik dan juga pembuat dasar, serta keterusan metodologi supaya ianya dapat dianalisis dan boleh dipercayai. So, pada akhirnya sekarang ini data ini hanyalah alat sahaja. So, yang benar-benar menentukan perubahan ialah bagaimana data itu digunakan untuk merangka dasar yang lebih bijak dan memberi manfaat kepada masyarakat.
Kita nak tengok dari segi cabaran lah doktor. Mungkin salah satu cabaran besar berkenaan dengan data yang boleh kita ketengahkan adalah data yang wujud tidak sentiasa terkini. Mungkin bukan latest. Jadi dalam dunia yang bergerak dengan pantas yang semakin kompleks, bagaimana sebenarnya isu data lag ataupun kelambatan kemaskini ini memberi kesan kepada proses membuat keputusan itu secara menyeluruh?
Ia bergantung kepada proses pengurusan data tersebut. Saya melihat perkara ini perlu untuk, seperti saya maklumkan sebentar tadi, ianya perlu dilaksanakan secara konsisten. So, kita tak nak pada takat ini kita masih lagi berada di tempat yang pertama dari segi pencapaian keterbukaan. Walaupun masih lagi ada lompong yang ada dari segi aspek yang seperti yang dimaklumkan sebentar tadi, dari aspek keganasan melibatkan gender, pelepasan gas karbon, hijau dan perkara-perkara yang lain dinyatakan dalam ranking tersebut. Untuk memastikan dasar ini terus untuk dilestarikan, ia perlukan ada satu komuniti yang melibatkan dalam pengurusan data tersebut. So, penglibatan data tersebut tidak melibatkan dalam usaha kerajaan sahaja. Ia juga melibatkan dalam aspek penyelidik dan juga masyarakat awam. So, dari aspek masyarakat awam, ia boleh juga melibatkan dari kita namakan sebagai satu inisiatif seperti yang telah diamalkan sekarang ini, iaitu citizen science. So, daripada aspek citizen science ini, ia dapat melibatkan orang awam dalam bersama-sama untuk memberi maklumat yang mereka dapat rekodkan bersama dengan pihak penyelidik. So, bila ada penglibatan dalam pelbagai pihak, ia dapat memastikan data ini dapat dihasilkan secara konsisten dan tidak hanya khusus kepada penyelidik maupun pihak-pihak yang bertanggungjawab yang terlibat.
Doktor dah jelaskan tentang peranan ataupun dari perspektif orang awam dan juga penyelidik, tapi dari segi perspektif akademik dan juga pendidikan lah. Kita nak tahu juga apa halangan yang paling besar mungkin dihadapi penyelidik ketika cuba menggunakan data terbuka kerajaan. Adakah ia mungkin dari segi format ataupun kebolehgunaan, adakah kualiti ataupun dari kekangan birokrasi itu sendiri?
Ianya lebih kepada dari segi data yang diterbitkan. Data diterbitkan dari ianya lengkap, cumanya ia perlu dari aspek bagaimana ianya boleh untuk direproducekan balik semula. Maknanya untuk diterbitkan semula, ia memerlukan langkah-langkah yang sama. Tidak boleh menggunakan langkah yang lain daripada apa yang telah dilakukan seperti mana yang data yang telah diterbitkan di dalam laman web kerajaan. Cumanya perkara ini perlu untuk mungkin ada dasar teknik dan juga kaedah-kaedah yang telah dilakukan. Cuma ia perlu untuk berhubung secara langsung kepada pihak yang menerbitkan data. Cumanya pada dalam konsep untuk open science ini, ianya harus untuk dikongsikan secara bersama. Seperti di Universiti Melaya, untuk Universiti Melaya Open Science, di mana kami menggunakan Dataverse sebagai platform untuk berkongsi data, dan dalam masa yang bukan sahaja data yang kami terbitkan, tetapi juga ada juga kaedah-kaedah yang perlu disertakan oleh pihak yang mendapatkan data tersebut, iaitu terutamanya penyelidik, untuk menyatakan declare bagaimana data tersebut dapat diraih daripada kajian mereka. So, bila ianya dikongsi, baru kami katakan sebagai data tersebut sebagai data lengkap, dan siapa saja yang menggunakan data tersebut ataupun melihat akses kepada platform tersebut dapat menggunakan data tersebut dengan menggunakan kaedah yang sama.
Doktor, yang terakhir secara ringkas, kita nak selitkan juga satu soalan ni dalam konteks global lah. Kedudukan nombor 1 ini meletakkan Malaysia sebagai rujukan. Tapi apa risiko jika Malaysia terlalu menekankan pencapaian ranking tetapi abaikan impak sebenar keterbukaan data terhadap rakyat dan juga dasar awam?
Ini hanya sekadar ranking sahajalah. Maknanya ia tidak dapat membantu dalam menyelesaikan masalah yang kita hadapi, dan juga tidak dapat untuk membina inovasi pada masa akan datang, terutama daripada kalangan penyelidik. So, penyelidik memerlukan data. Data ibarat seperti emas kepada penyelidik. So, apabila kita berkongsi data, bukan bermakna kita menyerahkan usaha keras kita kepada semua orang untuk menggunakan hasil usaha keras penyelidik untuk mendapatkan data tersebut. Tetapi ianya adalah satu peluang untuk berkolaborasi dan juga memperkembangkan kajian yang telah dilaksanakan sebelum ini. Maknanya, dari apabila kita mengamalkan konsep data terbuka ini berdasarkan fair principle seperti yang saya maklumkan sebentar tadi, ianya dapat membantu untuk kita mengembangkan lagi research, bukannya untuk sekadar untuk membuka data dan juga berkongsi data sahaja.
Terima kasih diucapkan kepada Dr. Azizi atas perkongsian pandangan tersebut, dan sudah tentu Malaysia sememangnya telah menunjukkan bahawa kita mampu menjadi antara negara terhadapan dalam keterbukaan data. Namun cabaran sebenar selepas ini ialah nak pastikan data bukan sekadar tersedia tetapi benar-benar digunakan untuk membentuk dasar yang lebih bijak dan memberi manfaat kepada masyarakat. Terima kasih diucapkan sekali lagi kepada Dr. Azizi. Kita ke perkembangan seterusnya. Rakyat Malaysia dinasihati menangguhkan perjalanan tidak penting ke Iran, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain dan Emirat Arab Bersatu. Ia memandangkan nasihat perjalanan rasmi yang dikeluarkan oleh Kementerian Luar masih berkuat kuasa sehingga diberitahu gelap.
Menurut Wisma Putra dalam satu kenyataan media pada Rabu, ia terus memantau dengan teliti ketidaktentuan situasi keselamatan dan perjalanan di seluruh Asia Barat serta terus berkoordinasi rapat dengan perwakilan diplomatik Malaysia di wilayah terjejas. Wisma Putra berkata keselamatan dan kebajikan rakyat Malaysia tetap menjadi keutamaan kementerian. Menurut Wisma Putra, ia mengambil maklum pengumuman pihak berkuasa UAE mengenai pembukaan ruang udara selamat yang ditetapkan serta perkhidmatan pergi dan balik sementara Malaysia Aviation Group MAG ke dan dari Jeddah serta Madinah pada 4 hingga 8 Mac. Susulan itu, pasukan misi diplomatik Malaysia kekal berhubung rapat dengan pihak berkuasa dan rakan kongsi operasi berkaitan untuk membantu rakyat Malaysia yang terjejas akibat gangguan perjalanan berterusan. Menurut Wisma Putra lagi, kementerian terus mengemaskini rekod rakyat Malaysia di wilayah terjejas, menerusi sistem e-consular dan sedang berkoordinasi dengan Kementerian Pendidikan Tinggi untuk memantau kebajikan pelajar Malaysia. Rakyat Malaysia yang belum berbuat demikian digalakkan mendaftar keberadaan mereka melalui e-consular. Manakala rakyat Malaysia yang ingin mendapatkan bantuan konsular digalakkan untuk menghubungi perwakilan diplomatik Malaysia berdekatan manakala bilik gerakan kementerian di Putrajaya yang beroperasi 24 jam.
Menteri di Jabatan Perdana Menteri Wilayah Persekutuan Hanayo mengumumkan pengurangan 80% bagi fee lesen Gymnasium di Kuala Lumpur, menurunkan kadar daripada RM50 kepada RM10 bagi setiap meter persegi, berkuat kuasa serta-merta. Ia berkata langkah tersebut diambil selepas 3 tahun sesi libat urus diadakan bersama pemain industri termasuk Persatuan Pengusaha Gymnasium Malaysia. Untuk rekod sebelum ini, pengusaha gymnasium membayar kira-kira RM5,000 setahun untuk fee lesen. Kini mereka hanya perlu bayar RM1,000, pengurangan sebanyak 8%. Jadi untuk kita berbincang lanjut tentang perkara ini, sesuai bersama dengan kita pada waktu ini adalah Pengurus Besar Gymnasium Fikif iaitu Saiful Iskandar. Assalamualaikum, selamat pagi Saiful. Sebenarnya angka 80% ni banyak penurunan filisin operasi gym sebanyak 80% ni kita lihat sebagai langkah besarlah oleh kerajaan. Jadi dari pandangan pengusaha sendiri, Saiful sebagai pengusaha, sejauh mana sebenarnya penjimatan kos ini benar-benar membantu kelangsungan operasi gym secara menyeluruh, terutamanya bagi pemain kecil dan juga komuniti? Silakan.
Okey, untuk langkah besar daripada kerajaan ni sebenarnya kita sangat-sangat appreciate lah sebab kalau kita nak tengok balik dari segi cash flow kita, 80% tu adalah sangat banyak dan ini boleh memberi ruang bernafas untuk pengusaha terutama kepada pemain kecil. Dan situasi fee lesen mahal ni Nabilah actually sangat serius sebab di kalangan kami pengusaha gym ada juga yang mengalami kesukaran untuk renew sebelum ni sebab lesen terlalu mahal. Lagi pula bila kita tengok industri yang lain punyai lesen yang agak jauh berbanding dengan industri kami. So jadi berita ini adalah satu berita yang sangat-sangat baguslah untuk kami pengusaha gym sebab kami pun sudah menunggu lama untuk kami dapat berita seperti ini dan ini adalah sangat berita yang sangat-sangat baiklah.
Kerajaan pun ada kaitkan dasar ini dengan agenda bandar sihat, terutama apabila kita lihatlah kadar obesiti di kawasan metropolitan seperti Kuala Lumpur telah pun cecah lebih 40%. Ini realiti di lapangan. Dan kita juga nak tahu adakah sebenarnya industri gym sebenarnya bersedia memainkan peranan lebih besar sebagai rakan strategik dalam nak tangani krisis kesihatan awam ni. Apa pandangan Saiful?
Okey, Nabilah, untuk bab kecerdasan ni saya boleh cakap kami di industri fitness ataupun kecergasan ni memang daripada dulu kita dah mainkan peranan untuk raise the awareness ataupun kita bantu educate members ataupun klien kita berkenaan krisis kesihatan dalam Malaysia ni. Bukannya kami ni macam baru nak start. Cuma bab obesity ni apa yang saya boleh katakan dia lebih kepada pemakanan sebenarnya daripada kecergasan. Kalau kita pergi gym 3 kali seminggu pun apa yang saya boleh cakap dia baru cover 2% je daripada total jam kehidupan kita dalam seminggu. So mesej saya dekat sini adalah kalau kita tak jaga pemakanan kita, kita punya tidur kita punya lifestyle lah secara menyeluruh, still masalah kesihatan ni masih lagi ada. Tapi kalaulah ini menjadi langkah yang pertama untuk kita tangani krisis kesihatan ni, then saya rasa good enough. Tapi kalau apa yang saya boleh cakap kalau macam gym murah macam mana sekalipun, tapi kalau kita tak aware dengan bab kesihatan kita, lifestyle kita dan juga kita tak tengok apa benda yang kita masukkan dekat dalam mulut kita, saya rasa masalah obesiti dan juga penyakit yang tidak berjangkit seperti sakit jantung dan sebagainya ni boleh agak susah lah untuk kita bendung. Tapi berbalik kepada soalan, industri gym memang bersedia untuk kita jadi rakan strategik untuk kita tangani masalah ni sebab kita memang dah buat daripada dulu pun untuk kita raise the awareness berkenaan dengan pemakanan, berkenaan dengan kesihatan kepada rakyat ataupun dekat members kita. Cuma negara kita ni, kita pun tahu industri makanan ataupun industri makanan kita ni agak besar, sebab itulah kita masih lagi menang dalam bab obesity terutama dekat Southeast Asia kita.
Memang susah lah kalau kita tengok makanan-makanan kita itu bergantung kepada nafsu makanan individu itu sendiri. Betul. Tapi ini juga macam saya katalah berita baik dan kita sambut baik inisiatif yang dikeluarkan oleh kerajaan ini. Tapi dengan cadangan kerajaan supaya pengusaha tawarkan diskaun keahlian pada waktu tertentu serta kepada warga emas, bagaimana sebenarnya pemilik gym ataupun Saiful sendiri sebagai pengusaha boleh nak seimbangkan antara tanggungjawab sosial dan juga realiti kos operasi yang semakin meningkat pada waktu ini?
Bagi saya mungkin kepada big player mungkin mudah untuk mereka tawarkan diskaun-diskaun seperti ini sebab mungkin resource mereka lebih daripada kita dan juga volume klien dan juga members diorang jauh lagi besar daripada kita, terutama kita yang pemain kecil. Tapi apa yang saya nampak sekarang, warga emas ke gym ni dah semakin ramai sebab terutama daripada generasi kita sendiri dah ramai mereka yang bawa ibu bapa mereka untuk hire personal trainer dan sebagainya. So benda ni adalah salah satu benda yang positif yang saya nampak dalam masyarakat. Dan of course kalaulah kita boleh beri diskaun pada waktu tertentu dan juga diskaun untuk warga emas, itu akan benefit diorang lebih lagi. Tapi kalau tak ada pun pengguna masih lagi boleh mencari option yang lain yang kena dengan bajet masing-masing. Sebab gym pun ada macam-macam jenis Nabilah. Kita ada group classes, kita ada membership, kita ada personal training studio, kita ada martial arts dan sebagainya. So kalau kita nak cerita pasal bajet, kita nak cerita pasal diskaun dan sebagainya, kita sebagai taxpayer pun kita dah boleh claim kita punya tax untuk sports activity, untuk gym membership kita. So dekat situ kita dah dapat benefit, kita dah dekat sebelah saja. Apa yang saya nampak untuk pengurangan fee lesen ni, dia lebih kepada untuk memberi ruang bernafas kepada pengusaha gym. Sebab kalaulah kita nak memberi diskaun pun, kalau makin ramai orang datang gym tu, boleh jadi kos gym tu pun boleh jadi naik juga. Sebab kalau dah makin ramai orang datang, maintenance fee, maintenance cost mungkin akan bertambah. Mungkin gym tersebut memerlukan staff yang ekstra, mungkin cleaning fee dan sebagainya, segala kos mungkin akan bertambah. So dekat situ ada banyak lagi faktor yang kita kena ambil kira kalau kita nak mengharapkan diskaun, terutama daripada pengusaha-pengusaha yang kecil lah.
Tapi kita mungkin risau juga akan menimbulkan lambakan gym tanpa model perniagaan yang mampan, dan sebab ini buka ruang kepada lebih banyak pemain baru memasuki pasaran. Tapi itu juga masih perkara yang baik untuk kita galakkan ramai orang daftar ataupun subscribe kepada gym. Tapi antara lain, kalau kita nak tengok juga perspektif lain dari DBKL sendiri, ada menegaskan bahawa kadar lesen lebih rendah hanya terpakai kepada premis pure gym dan tidak melibatkan jualan produk komersial seperti suplemen sebagai contoh. Jadi bagaimana peraturan ini mempengaruhi strategi perniagaan pengusaha ataupun Saiful sendiri yang sebelum ini bergantung kepada jualan tambahan untuk tampung kos operasi?
Untuk buat penjualan suplemen sebagai salah satu revenue stream, bagi saya benda ini normal. Tapi kalau di BKL memerlukan kita untuk offer, untuk kita apply lesen yang lain, saya rasa fair. Sebab mungkin alasan mereka nak memantau apa benda yang kita jual. Sebab suplemen kan ada macam-macam jenis. Sebab kita pun tak tahu suplemen ni selamat ke tak digunakan. So mungkin di BKL memerlukan kita pengusaha gym untuk sediakan dokumentasi yang lebih lengkap. Kita nak jual suplemen jenis apa, selamat ke, ada kelulusan ke, tak ada. Tapi di sudut yang lain pula, of course benda ni mungkin merusakkan pengusaha juga. Sebab kebiasaannya revenue stream kita datang juga daripada jualan-jualan tambahan seperti suplemen, merchandise, beverages dan sebagainya. So untuk bab ni bagi saya ada bagus ni juga, tetapi mungkin di BKL boleh bagi kelonggaran sedikit untuk bab ni. Dan apa yang di BKL dah buat sekarang adalah salah satu inisiatif yang baik lah.
Mungkin last lah, yang terakhir Saiful, mungkin bagaimana Saiful melihat dengan perubahan ini yang dikeluarkan oleh Menteri Kesihatan Sukan boleh mengubah industri gym secara keseluruhan bergerak ke hadapan?
Untuk saya, of course lah, macam saya cakap tadi, kalau gym owner decide untuk murahkan gym fees diorang, dan lebih ramailah orang yang boleh datang gym tersebut. Tapi jika makin ramai datang, kos yang lain mungkin akan naik. So dekat situ, here and there, mungkin tak semua gym boleh kurangkan gym membership diorang sebab disebabkan kos-kos lain. Tapi bottom line saya adalah, kalau kita nak mengharapkan diskaun, mungkin susah. Tapi apa yang kita boleh harapkan, mungkin gym owner boleh tambah value yang ada dekat gym diorang. Mungkin fasiliti yang lebih lengkap, equipment yang lebih baru, fasiliti yang lebih cantik, staff yang ramai dan sebagainya. So of course kalau kita nak cerita pasal menjadi sebahagian usaha untuk gaya hidup sihat untuk Malaysia, saya rasa ini akan memberi satu impact yang agak besar lah, kita tengok pada masa akan datang, insyaAllah.
Baik, kita dah dengar sendiri suara daripada pengurus besar FitKif ataupun Gymnasium di Kuala Lumpur ini. Itu pandangan dari pengurus. Kita ni sebagai pengguna lah, orang awam, dah bolehlah start subscribe ataupun daftar gym yang berdekatan supaya untuk kita amalkan hidup sihat dan kurangkan kadar obesiti di negara kita. Baik, banyak lagi yang akan kita bincangkan selepas ini. Jadi kita perlu berhenti rehat seketika, kembali selepas ini.
Saya pilih Unify Business.
Mereka ada penyelesaian untuk kejayaan yang lebih jelas. Unify G Business Mobile, majukan saya. Go Bukit, uruskan segalanya.
Internet grade perniagaan, meluaskan rangkaian.
Solusi pemasaran digital, melebarkan capaian. Layanan prioriti, menyinangkan lagi perniagaan.
Perkembangan digital meningkat pantas dengan program Impact Biz.
Tingkatkan perniagaan anda dengan Unify Business hari ini.
Herbal Essences melembutkan dan menyelatkan semula rambut anda dengan 100% pati tumbuhan sebenar seperti minyak argan dan aloe. Menutrisi secara mendalam untuk rambut lembut dan berkilat semula. Bebas daripada paraben, parafin dan pewarna. Herbal Essences.
Kementerian Pendidikan bertanggungjawab sepenuhnya terhadap keselamatan murid dan pelajar sewaktu mereka di sekolah.
Malaysia dan Korea Selatan terus memperkukuh kerjasama dalam bidang teknologi hijau dan kecerdasan buatan AI menerusi pelaburan dua syarikat utama Republik itu.
SPRM akan meneliti dan menjalankan siasatan sekiranya terdapat unsur rasuah dalam pelaksanaan projek Aerotrain di KLIA yang dilaporkan sering mengalami gangguan perkhidmatan.
Di sebalik setiap kejayaan, ada visi. Inilah kisah usahawan Bumiputra yang membina jenama, mencipta peluang dan menggerakkan ekonomi negara. Dipacu oleh aspirasi Pelan Transformasi Ekonomi Bumiputra 2035 dengan sokongan ekosistem dan agensi pemacu, mereka melangkah lebih jauh dari pasaran tempatan ke pentas global. Saksikan Putra 35 setiap Isnin jam 10 pagi, eksklusif di Astro AWANI.
Hamas says it is fully prepared to hand over administrative authority in Gaza to a newly formed Palestinian Technocratic Committee. The US president cannot threaten his way into owning Greenland, an autonomous territory of Denmark.
Welcome back to Niagawani, and here's some international update. US stocks closed up on Wednesday after a news report that Iran had signaled openness to talks and a pledge by President Donald Trump to steady all markets calmed investor anxiety about the Middle East clash. Investors flocked again to tech shares, lifting the Nasdaq and keeping the tech-heavy index in positive territory since the US-Israeli strike on Iran that ignited the conflict in the Middle East. The S&P 500 remained close to its all-time closing high in January. The S&P 500 gained 52.87 points or 0.78%, while the Nasdaq Composite gained 290.79 points or 1.29%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 238.14 points or 0.49%.
Today we've got markets just continuing to be resilient markets. I mean, look, we've got coming off of 3 straight years of really good returns. I've had a shaky 2026 so far, but I think the reality is, aside from some smaller, and I don't mean to downplay certain things that are obviously big globally, but from a market standpoint, from what affects revenue, earnings, and that sort of thing, there's really nothing major hitting. To the contrast, I think we're getting data that's showing that the U.S. economy especially is continuing to be really resilient. Consumers resilient, jobs resilient. So I think that's going to continue to be the real story for markets.
Oil prices settled unchanged on Wednesday at the end of a volatile trading session as escalating US and Israeli strikes against Iran widened regional tensions and paralyzed the shipping through the Strait of Hormuz for a 5th day, disrupting vital Middle East oil and gas flows. Brent crude settled at $81.40 per barrel, flat to Tuesday's close and at its highest since January 2025. According to senior market analyst at Trado.com, Nikos Zaburas oil prices remain elevated as markets grapple with the prospect of a prolonged war and lingering supply disruptions. He said the US has signaled a 4 to 5 week campaign. Iran is seeking to regionalize the conflict and the crucial Strait of Hormuz choke point is effectively shut. These developments could overturn previously unfavorable supply-demand dynamics, pushing crude higher and bringing the $100 threshold into view. Iraq has cut oil production by nearly 1.5 million barrels a day, and those cuts could widen to more than 3 million barrels per day within days as the country runs out of storage and cannot export crude due to the Iran crisis, two Iraqi oil officials told Reuters on Tuesday. As of Tuesday, Iraq has cut production from the Rumaila oil field by 700,000 barrels per day, from the West Kurna 2 field by 460,000 barrels per day, and from the Maisan field by 325,000 barrels per day, the officials who did not wish to be named said. The output cut could grow to over 3 million barrels per day if all tankers cannot move freely through the Strait of Hormuz and reach loading ports, said Ali Shaddad, member of Iraqi Parliament Oil and Gas Committee. The oil ministry said later in the day that the reduction in its crude oil production, owing to the halt in exports after the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, would not affect productions and operation at its refineries, state media reported. Iraq's refining capacity stands at around 1.1 million barrels per day, according to Iraqi energy officials and oil ministry data. Baik, sementara itu kita akan teruskan dengan perbincangan berkenaan dengan Malaysia berdepan isu semasa ataupun menunggu panjang di fasiliti kesihatan awam yang lama namun menolak pembinaan hospital baharu sebagai sebahagian daripada penyelesaian adalah terlalu ringkas. Realitinya kita lihat keperluan infrastruktur tetap wujud selari dengan pertumbuhan populasi, perubahan demografi dan juga permintaan rawatan yang meningkat. Cadangan untuk mengalihkan sebahagian perkhidmatan primer kepada klinik GP meskipun bukan baharu, kita lihat masih bergelut untuk dilaksanakan akibat kekangan politik, fiskal dan juga logistik. Dan data KKM menunjukkan kebergantungan besar kepada sistem awam, justru outsourcing ke GP tidak boleh dianggap sebagai jalan pintas. Kapasiti serapan klinik kecil, kita lihat perbezaan struktur kos juga, dan juga ada had kompetensi klinikal serta keperluan latihan semula bermakna sebarang peralihan mesti dilakukan secara terancang tanpa rangka kerja rujukan yang jelas, rekod perubatan digital bersepadu dan model pembayaran yang mampan. Usaha penswastaan terpilih tidak akan menangani punca sebenar kesesakan. Jadi untuk sama-sama kita kupas isu ini adalah Azrul Muhammad Khalib, pengasas dan juga CEO Center for Health and Social Policy. Terima kasih Azrul kerana bersama dengan kami. Kita lihat dengan lebih 68 juta lawatan pesakit ke fasiliti kesihatan awam direkodkan pada tahun 2023. Jadi kita nak tahu adakah kesesakan hospital ini sebenarnya berpunca daripada kekurangan hospital ataupun kegagalan sistem mengagihkan peranan antara hospital dan juga klinik GP secara lebih strategik.
Terima kasih Nabilah. Kalau kita melihat nombor yang Nabilah mengatakan tadi, di mana kita melihat hampir secara purata 2 lawatan setiap tahun dilakukan oleh setiap individu dalam populasi Malaysia, ianya memang menunjukkan bahawa peningkatan dari segi demandnya atau keperluan untuk mendapat rawatan terutamanya kesihatan primer semakin meningkat. Kementerian Kesihatan telah menekankan beberapa kali mengenai sistem kesihatan yang semakin tertekan disebabkan penyakit tidak berjangkit seperti diabetes, cardiovascular disease, chronic kidney disease, penyakit buah pinggang dan sebagainya yang semakin meningkat di kalangan masyarakat Malaysia. Dan kalau kita melihat suku juta mempunyai 4 daripada NCD yang kita lihat seperti hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, obesity dan sebagainya, dan 2.5 juta mempunyai 3 atau lebih penyakit tidak berjangkit ini. Dan ianya bukan sebenarnya satu kegagalan dari segi infrastruktur sebenarnya, tetapi sebenarnya peningkatan tekanan disebabkan demand yang semakin tinggi, semakin ramai yang sakit, yang tidak sihat. Dan walaupun kita mempunyai sistem yang terbaik pun, tidak mungkin kita dapat menangani demand yang semakin meningkat ini setiap tahun. Tapi walau bagaimanapun, kalau kita melihat ianya juga terpaksa menghadapi masalah di mana setiap tahun kita menghadapi pengurangan tenaga kerja, terutamanya di kalangan pekerja kesihatan sektor kesihatan awam. Kita melihat lebih kurang 2,000 orang pekerja kesihatan terutamanya di kalangan doktor dan jururawat yang meninggalkan sistem tenaga kerja kesihatan awam. Kalau kita melihat dari segi angka, kita memerlukan lebih kurang 13,000 orang doktor untuk menganggotai sistem kesihatan awam hingga kini, dan ianya menyebabkan kesesakan yang begitu ketara di dalam ward, tempat menunggu untuk klinik kesihatan dan juga di ward-ward kecemasan dan di hospital kesihatan awam. So memang kita tak boleh nak sebenarnya menunding jari mengatakan sistem kesihatan awam ni tidak bagus, tapi sebenarnya ianya menghadapi tekanan yang cukup tinggi disebabkan tahap kesihatan masyarakat Malaysia yang semakin merosot.
Sekarang kita dah tahu punca-puncanya iaitu tekanan yang tinggi disebabkan oleh peningkatan jumlah pesakit yang makin ramai dan juga kekurangan penjawat awam, dan ini membawa kepada cadangan memindahkan sebahagian rawatan pesakit luar kepada klinik GP swasta yang kita sering sebutlah sebagai penyelesaian. Namun secara realistiknya kan Azrul, adakah sebenarnya kapasiti klinik GP sedia ada yang kebanyakannya berskala kecil pada waktu ini dan juga beroperasi secara solo benar-benar mampu menyerap sebahagian besar permintaan pesakit ataupun demand tanpa pelaburan besar dalam sistem dan juga infrastruktur?
Sebenarnya Nabilah, ini merupakan satu cadangan yang cukup baik kerana pada waktu ini seringkali kita melihat sistem kesihatan kita melihat adanya dua, awam dan swasta, dan kita melihatnya secara berasingan dan bukannya selari dan sekata, tapi ianya menyebabkan pengurangan penggunaan salah satu daripada sistem kesihatan, iaitu sistem kesihatan swasta, dan terlalu ramai menggunakan sistem kesihatan awam. Dan kalau kita tengok proportion penduduk yang menggunakan awam, ianya adalah lebih kurang 70% menggunakan sistem kesihatan awam dan 30% menggunakan sistem kesihatan swasta. Sekiranya kita dapat boleh mengurangkan jumlah atau peratusan yang menggunakan sistem kesihatan awam ni dan kita mengalihkan ia kepada sistem kesihatan swasta, mungkin kita dapat mengurangkan tekanan pada sistem kesihatan awam ni. Walau bagaimanapun, kita perlu lihat ianya bukan sahaja pada tahap tertiary tapi primary, iaitu pada peringkat di mana kita lihat klinik-klinik GP dan sebagainya, klinik kesihatan, dan ianya pada peringkat inilah di mana perlunya ada satu sistem, ada koordinasi yang membolehkan bukan sahaja pesakit dapat mengakses menggunakan perkhidmatan kesihatan itu, tapi juga dapat membiayai sistem kesihatan ini. Dan itu adalah salah satu daripada cabaran utama di sistem kesihatan Malaysia ni, disebabkan kalau kita pergi awam, kita tidak perlu
RM1, kemudian RM5 dan seterusnya akan memberikan satu subsidi yang membolehkan kos itu dapat terus diberikan bantuan kepada pesakit tersebut. Walau bagaimanapun, pada sistem kesihatan swasta, kita perlu lihat bagaimana kita perlu membiayai kos tersebut kerana ianya perlu dibayai.
Perlu dibayai, dan ini adalah salah satu daripada masalah yang kita hadapi. Memang kita kecewa sedikitlah untuk bajet belanjawan tahun ini. Kita melihat dari segi belanjawan yang diberikan, peruntukan yang diberikan pada skrim perubatan madani telah dikurangkan, dan ianya tidak sepatutnya begitu kerana ramai yang perlu menggunakan GP klinik tu kerana ianya mempunyai salah satu daripada choice atau pilihan yang boleh digunakan oleh pesakit. Tapi memang sekiranya kita boleh meningkatkan penggunaan klinik kesihatan swasta atau GP klinik ini, memang lebih bagus. Tapi cabaran utama ini bukan saja dari segi kos, tapi juga di manakah klinik-klinik ini. Kebanyakan daripada klinik ini terdapatnya di bandar atau kota-kota kecil, tapi tidak di kampung atau di pedalaman, dan ini merupakan salah satu daripada cabaran atau halangan yang perlu ditangani sekiranya kita perlu gunakan GP klinik atau klinik kesihatan swasta ini. Tapi memang sepatutnya kita meningkatkan penggunaan kerana ianya sebahagian daripada sistem kesihatan secara keseluruhan untuk rakyat Malaysia.
Jadi ini kita boleh kata kita boleh sambut dengan baik, tapi ada jugalah cons dia di mana kita juga risau ada berisiko meningkatkan perbelanjaan kepada kerajaan jika struktur bayaran dan juga kawalan harga tidak direka dengan teliti. Tapi kalau kita lihatlah klinik GP diberi tanggungjawab lebih besar termasuk pengurusan penyakit kronik sebagai contoh ataupun rawatan susulan pakar ataupun penjagaan ibu dan anak. Sejauh mana Azrul melihat sistem latihan semula ataupun akreditasi klinikal dan juga integrasi rekod perubatan perlu ditransformasikan bagi memastikan standard rawatan kekal selamat dan juga konsisten di seluruh negara?
Kalau kat Malaysia ni kita selalu tekankan atau memberikan tumpuan kepada doktor saja. Sikit-sikit kita fikirkan, kita bicarakan tentang doktor. Tapi kalau di negara luar, kita melihat penggunaan pekerja kesihatan ni lebih menyeluruh, termasuklah jururawat, termasuklah pekerja kesihatan bersekutu, allied health sciences, allied health workers dan sebagainya. Dan ianya menggunakan seluruh anggota kerja pekerja kesihatan ini untuk membolehkan penyakit diberikan diagnosis, dikenal pasti dan diberikan rawatan yang sepatutnya dan terusnya dirawat dan sembuh. Ianya tidak perlu bertumpukan 100% atau sepenuhnya kepada hanya doktor, tapi juga kepada jururawat yang mungkin mempunyai kepakarannya yang tersendiri. Mungkin juga ada pembantu perubatan yang boleh diberikan tauliah ataupun dilatih sebagaimana kita lihat di negara-negara lain. Banyak yang perlu atau boleh kita pelajari daripada negara seperti Korea, Singapura, Jepun, UK dan sebagainya, di mana mereka menggunakan tenaga kerja mereka dengan lebih efektif dan lebih membolehkan adanya kepakaran dan juga tangga kerjaya career pathway yang membolehkan ianya dinilai dan dihargai. Sekarang ni kalau kita melihat penumpuan kita sering kali dialog tu bersekitarkan tentang doktor saja. Jururawat kita yang mempunyai tenaga kerja yang cukup baik dan mempunyai kepakaran yang kita punya jururawat ni antara yang terbaik di dunia lah, katakan, sehingga kalau nak pergi Timur Tengah atau pergi Eropah, Australia dan sebagainya memang dalam demand ya. Dan ianya menunjukkan bahawa kita punya skill atau kepakaran untuk jururawat ni memang ada, dan oleh itu kita perlu adanya satu pathway atau pentauliahan yang ada pada waktu ini diperluaskan bagi membolehkan rawatan itu boleh diberikan bukan sahaja oleh doktor tapi juga kepada jururawat atau pembantu perubatan yang sedia ada.
Baik, demikian tadi Azrul Muhammad Khalid, pengasas dan juga Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif Center for Health and Social Policy, kerana bantu kami faham tentang isu ataupun krisis kesihatan yang berlakunya lambakan di klinik kerajaan dan bagaimana kita boleh atasinya. Dan terima kasih diucapkan sekali lagi kepada Azrul, dan semuanya akan kami rangkumkan dalam semua platform digital dan juga Astro ini. Saya teruskan dengan perkembangan antarabangsa. The United States is actively working on plans to secure the Strait of Hormuz and ensure safe passage for all tankers, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said on Wednesday as tensions with Iran continue. Leavitt declined to provide a timeline but said the Departments of Defense and Energy were closely coordinating and regularly briefing President Donald Trump. She added that the US Navy could escort all tankers through the strategic waterway if necessary.
The timeline for making the Strait of Hormuz safe for oil tankers to transport their oil through the strait, what is that timeline and what can the president do to speed up that timeline?
I don't want to commit to a timeline, but certainly it's something that is being calculated actively by both the Department of War and the Department of Energy. They're working very closely. Both secretaries are in all of the briefings on this subject with the president, and this is, again, something they're monitoring. And if and when necessary, the United States Navy will provide assistance to escort oil tankers through the strait.
Asked about the possibility of deploying US ground troops to Iran, Leavitt said such move was not part of the current operational plan. However, she stressed that the president would not take military options off the table, saying decisions would depend on how the situation develops. Spain has agreed to cooperate with US military, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said on Wednesday, a day after President Donald Trump threatened to cut trade with Madrid over its stance against the US-Israeli strikes on Iran. Trump floated imposing a trade embargo on Madrid over its refusal to allow US aircraft to use jointly operated naval and air bases in southern Spain for the offensive against Tehran. Spain has denounced the US and Israeli bombings of Iran as reckless and illegal.
With respect to Spain, I think they heard the president's message yesterday loud and clear. And it's my understanding over the past several hours they've agreed to cooperate with the U.S. military. And so I know that the U.S. military is coordinating with their counterparts in Spain. But the president expects all of our European allies, of course, to cooperate in this long sought after mission, not just for the United States, but also for Europe, to crush the rogue Iranian regime that, again, not only threatens America, but also threatens our European allies as well.
Russian President Vladimir Putin suggested on Wednesday that Russia could stop supplying gas to European markets now and move to more promising markets. The European Commission will submit a legal proposal to permanently ban Russian oil imports on April 15th, 3 days after Hungary's parliamentary election, according to EU officials and a document seen by Reuters. According to Putin, now that other markets are opening up, it would be more profitable for Russia to stop supplying the European market right now.
Все равно они, как вы сейчас сказали, планируют через месяц, 24-го последний день, с 25-го ввести ограничения на покупку российского газа, в том числе сжиженного, а через год, в 27-м году, еще дальнейшие ограничения, вплоть до полного запрета. А сейчас открываются другие рынки. И, может быть, нам выгоднее прямо сейчас прекратить поставки на европейский рынок, уйти на те рынки, которые открываются, и там закрепиться. И здесь тоже нет, хочу, чтобы было понятно, никакой политической подоплеки. Но если нам все равно через месяц закроют, или через 2, так не лучше самим сейчас прекратить.
Putin reiterated that Russia has always been a reliable energy supplier and will continue to work in this manner with those partners who are themselves reliable, such as Slovakia and Hungary. Malaysia's industrial property market is entering one of its strongest growth cycles, driven by surging investments in data centers, e-commerce logistics and E&E manufacturing. In 2024, industrial property transaction values jumped 22% year-on-year in the third quarter to 7.2 billion ringgit, signaling rising investor interest. Malaysia has also secured more than 57 billion ringgit in data center investments, with a total pipeline valued at 149 billion ringgit, underscoring its accelerating role in regional digital infrastructure. Looking ahead to 2026, industrial assets are expected to remain the standout reformer, fueled by digitalization and increasing AI-related infrastructure needs. At the same time, key hubs such as Kuala Lumpur, Penang and Johor continue to record firm rental growth and rising industrial land values, driven by strong interest from MNCs, logistics operators and global tech companies. And Penang remains a major E&E manufacturing centre, while Johor has rapidly emerged as a significant data centre cluster linked to Singapore's expanding digital ecosystem. And this momentum, however, raises new questions. Can incoming supply keep pace with demand? And how sustainable is tenant quality? And what risk could reshape Malaysia's industrial narrative beyond 2026? So to answer these questions, we have Siva Shankar, Director Real Estate Agency, Rahim & Co. Assistant on the line. Good morning, Siva. How are you?
Good morning. Hi. Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Thank you for being here with me on AWANI. First question I would like to know is what we're seeing in the industrial market a post-pandemic rebound or actually a structural repositioning of Malaysia within regional supply chains, and what data convinces you either way?
Okay. So this is no sudden surge. What we are seeing is very slow and steady growth that has been held very steady over the last 10 years. Even in the 5 years before COVID, when all the other sectors of the property market was on a decline, you must remember that 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, we've seen the property market declining. But in all those years, the industrial market held very firm and very steady. And yes, there was a bit of a dip during the COVID years, but it recovered very quickly in 2022 and has been moving ahead right up to even last year in 2025. The industrial market still recorded a positive.
When we break down the demand that we see today, in your opinion, Siva, which segment is generally leading? Is it the e-commerce and third-party logistics? Is it the data centers or E&E manufacturing, or perhaps the multinational relocation activity? What are your opinion on that?
Okay, so I think it's a bit of everything. You've asked a very important question. I think it's a bit of everything. Of course, immediately after COVID, what was very apparent was the surge in e-commerce, warehousing. So the big part of the market, of the industrial market, was really warehousing. People needed somewhere to store their goods. So because of the surge in e-commerce, so that took a big leap ahead. But in the last couple of years, we've seen the data center boom all of a sudden come into Malaysia and take a big portion of the industrial market. And then that's mainly due to the fact that Singapore imposed a moratorium on data centers, and so the data centers came into Malaysia. Of course, I think Singapore now has reversed their decision, but maybe a bit too late now, because that the play into the Malaysian market has come in. We are able to offer cheaper land, cheaper materials, cheaper workmanship, cheaper labor as compared to Singapore. So data centers have led the way forward. And I think in the last few years, the government has made all the right noises and has been marketing Malaysia as a business-friendly environment. The slogan, the mantra, of course, is Malaysia is open for business. Come and invest in Malaysia. We are a friendly nation. We will make things easy for you, and I think that's led a bit of a growth as well. So it's a combination of all three.
As what you were saying, which actually of these demand drivers has the strongest staying power over the next 3 to 5 years? What's your outlook?
Now, in my opinion, I think if we want the industrial market to hold steady and keep going forward, the bread and butter will be the FDI. We must go back to basics. We must be able to build factories that are producing something. So the idea should be that I buy goods. I buy many different types of goods. I assemble and I sell something and make a profit in doing so. And that, I think, is the most fundamental of all industrial activities. The data center and the warehousing, I think that could be a bit of a lifespan. The surge could go down, and if the surge does go down, then we will see supply overtaking demand. But if we can continue investments into manufacturing, that I think is the sustainable one.
That's on the figures. We've seen firm rental growth and also rising industrial land values, particularly in Klang Valley, Penang, and also Johor. Realistically, are we beginning to see rental resistance from occupiers? And at what point do rising land and also development costs start compressing yields and also affecting Malaysia's competitiveness as a whole?
So here's the thing. I think yields have already started to get a little bit compressed. These are sometimes things that we don't want to see or don't want to accept. But as values go up and if rents don't follow, then the yield compresses. So there is a bit of a resistance to rental increases, although rents have increased. I'm not saying it hasn't. It has increased, but I think it hasn't increased to keep in line with capital value increases. So in the last few years, we have seen yields drop a little bit.
I've mentioned earlier about the Malaysia's industrial property market entering one of its strongest growth cycles. But strong performance always or often tracks aggressive supply. So what does the incoming industrial pipeline look like over the next perhaps 24 to 36 months? Are we at risk of oversupply, particularly in logistic parks or speculative developments, Siva?
You're asking me all the difficult questions. It is a double-edged sword. Yeah, you must understand that a success in any sector of the market will bring demand into that sector. Will bring supply into that sector. So it's like a double-edged sword. And if we are not careful, if we don't weigh supply and demand carefully, then we might have a situation of supply overtaking demand. See, right now, I think the industrial market is as close to equilibrium as it can be. There is never a perfect market, so we will never see perfect equilibrium of supply and demand. But if they're close enough, then I think we are already on a steady footing. But if the industrial market continues its current successful run, and if more players enter into the market with more incoming supply, then I think it stands to reason that if demand cannot keep up, then we might see a slight oversupply situation. Yes, so we have to be careful of that.
But absorption is one thing. I want to know, how strong is tenant quality? Are landlords securing long-term leases from multinational corporates, or are we seeing shorter commitments? And is there now a widening performance gap between high-spec, ESG compliant facilities and also older industrial stock? What are your thoughts?
Okay, I think tenant retention has held very steady. My opinion is industrial tenants are very steady and very strong. All the industrial players have been reporting very good results. All the REITs, the developers who've gone into industrial, the asset managers who've gone into industrial, they've all reported very good results. So tenants have held steady. Even the SST, they have very comfortably absorbed the SST. Of course, there was a bit of a hesitation, but the markets absorbed it, so that's going very well. They are signing long leases. The industrial leases are the most steady ones because they're very long, and there is a built-in increase in rent every few years. So, your yield keeps getting better and better and better over time. So I think, industrial tenancies and leases are holding very steady.
Last one before we wrap up. Looking forward, if we look at 2026 and beyond, what is the single biggest risk to this industrial growth narrative? And what should investors and developers be most cautious about right now?
I think we should be a little bit cautious about overbuilding. I don't think the industrial market, it's a bit inelastic, right? Demand doesn't increase overnight. You can't create demand where there isn't one. So growth has to be slow and steady, organic. And I think building needs to be tempered with where the demand is. So we should, if we build carefully, if we build to suit, or if we build according to demand, then I think the industrial market will continue to have legs to run for some years to go.
So what we can say now is Malaysia's industrial sector is powering through one of its strongest phases yet, but the real story lies in whether this momentum can be sustained. And the question now also is how well the market can balance expansion, quality and also long-term stability. So that was Siva Shankar, Director in Real Estate Agency, Rahim and Co-Chestertons. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for more insightful discussion after this on the economy with Ibrahim Sani. So right now we'll go for a short break. We'll be right back.
Saya pilih Unify Business.
Mereka ada penyelesaian untuk kejayaan yang lebih jelas. Unify G Business Mobile, majukan saya.
Go Bukit, uruskan segalanya.
Internet grade perniagaan, meluaskan rangkaian.
Solusi pemasaran digital, melebarkan capaian.
Layanan prioriti, menyenangkan lagi perniagaan.
Perkembangan digital meningkat pantas dengan program Impact Biz.
Tingkatkan perniagaan anda dengan Unify Business hari ini.
Aiskrim Cadbury Hazelnut Baharu. Anda pasti tepikan.
Buli di sekolah. Isu ini bukan perkara baru. Buli tertakluk kepada perbuatan agresif secara fizikal.
Apa sebenarnya jerabu punca utama yang menyumbang kepada masalah ini serta kesannya kepada kesihatan kita?
Mereka akan mengalami iritasi-iritasi kepada mata. Selain itu, iritasi kepada saluran pernafasan.
5 Mac ini, semua dijemput ke Pavilion KL untuk Astro Raya Showcase.
3, 2, 1.
Sertai pelancaran iklan dan album raya kami.
Aku bangga tengok kau.
Jadi yang pertama untuk ketahui pelbagai rancangan raya kami.
Saya suka.
Kongsi kegembiraan dengan artis-artis kami di musim perayaan ini. Bila bersama lagi jadi. Sertai Astro Raya Showcase di Pavilion KL.
Hamas says it is fully prepared to hand over administrative authority in Gaza to a newly formed Palestinian technocratic committee. The US president cannot threaten his way into owning Greenland, an autonomous territory of Denmark.
Thanks for joining us. This is Economy. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. And joining me today is the political associate professor of IIUM, Dr. Shazza Shukri. She's also the ICS Yusof Ishak Institute fellow as well. Dr. Shazza, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us. There's a lot of reforms that are currently being outlined by the Prime Minister and by the government, such as the institutionalizing the 10-year term limit or aggregated term limit for the Prime Minister. There's also this big topic right now that is currently being debated at the Parliament on the separation of the role of the Attorney General as well as the Public Prosecutor and a few other reforms. And for the traditional supporter of Pakatan Harapan, these are the exact reforms that they've been always fighting for. And for the Conservatives, this might not necessarily be one of those things that they are pushing forward currently, as they feel that there are other priorities that needs to be discussed and executed first. Because of these different stages of interest, I would argue, not necessarily conflict of interest, but different interests. How do you think things are panning out right now, especially when we saw the Prime Minister making such announcements at the turn of the year that on one hand surprised some of the observers, but on the other hand is a much welcome relief, especially from the Pakatan Harapan voter base. How do you look into all of these situations before we deep dive into some of the reforms that we talked about just now?
I mean, I agree with you that the Prime Minister is doing all of this because of this is what the voters, the Pakatan Harapan voters have wanted for so long. Most of the question has been surrounding the timing. You know, why is it now in 2026? You know, we've heard all the arguments. You know, they've had, 2 years of stabilizing the government, so now it's the best time. But now we're also hearing the issue of, it seems like they're pushing it now. So why are you pushing these reforms? Again, the argument is this is what our base wants, but is it the best for the country at this moment? And that's why you brought up that's the argument from the other side. But if I may differ a little bit, I would say that from Perikatan Nasional's perspective, it's more of them playing politics, if I may say it that way. That I like you, I don't think that they disagree with it fundamentally. It's more about, okay, they can't just give in and say, sure, we support the Prime Minister. There have to be a bit of a bargaining here and there so that they can appear as this formidable opposition, because they're also talking to their bases, right?
Yeah.
They can't just say, yeah, we support whatever the Prime Minister is doing. So this is how I'm looking at it. Both are thinking of, if I may say, on the next general election. Everyone is in campaign period right now. So this is how I see it right now.
And then, of course, when we look at some of the overtures made, say for instance by the opposition, that they argue, especially Dr. Sri Taqiyuddin, he argued that at the Parliament last week, he argued that 10-year limit is something that needs to be postponed or pushed off, and issues like cost of living, issues like economic matters needs to be debated. ART, for instance, and then of course DAP making very strong remarks, anywhere from saying that in the Congress of July that they will sit, they might need to rethink about their position currently in the executive branch. So, do you feel that the administration currently has building pressure to deliver what is needed, or do you think that this is, quite frankly, business as usual?
Yeah, I think the pressure is on them now, because the pressure is not coming from within their own, with their own partners, right, within their own government. So how can they just say, okay, we're not going to look at this, or we're going to ignore this? Because DAP is a major partner, the biggest seats within Pakatan Harapan as well. So how can you just ignore this biggest, if I might say, voter bloc for Pakatan Harapan? So they are under pressure. And also don't forget the 10-11 PKR MPs as well. So that's within Anwar's own party, right? So the pressure is very hard on them now to go forward with these reforms. But again, how do they navigate that? I mean, if you talk about economic issues, and those are the business as usual that they should not ignore, or, they should acknowledge. But the way that I see it is that, from my perspective, the government's thinking is they have focused on that for the past 2 years, right? 23, 24, 25, 3 years, in fact. They have focused on cost of living issues, and
and the proof is in the pudding, with strong GDP numbers being registered for the entire of 2025. Ringgit is actually quite strengthening against 3.89 currently. I don't know how it will be soon, but Ringgit being the best currency performer in Asia, and so on. There's also this whole notion of the direct financial assistance that is actually quite helping the rakyat, so to speak. So there's a lot that is worth noting to be discussed, but there are also other issues that, I guess, the SPRM issue, for instance, that is currently being hotly contested by all factions right now. But that aside, let's deep dive into the actual policy that is currently being done. Putting the term limit of a Prime Minister to, say, 10 years, on the offset, of course, the progressives would welcome such an institution. And the Conservatives are saying that now's not the time, but I fail to see their arguments. Maybe you could help us see what is the thinking behind the opposition of putting a term limit on a Prime Minister. Perhaps make us understand their point of view before we deep dive into the mechanics of how it could be done and could be done well in Malaysia.
Great. I like that you started with saying that the progressive have one view, conservative have another, because Malaysians are mostly conservative, so we have to think of it that way. So from their point of view, the argument is mostly on two things. Number one is why we're limiting a good leader, right? If someone is performing, why just say 10 years? And some of the examples that I keep on hearing when I talk to people, look at what Tun Mahathir did, right? He had 20 years, 22 years, and look how developed Malaysia has become. What would happen if he had left in 1991, right? Could we have seen the same Malaysia that we see today? So that's the first argument. The second argument is, I can't think of it right now. I forgot. It just slipped my mind. But let's focus on that, because that is the biggest one that they kept on saying, that in a democratic sense, right, why are you putting a limit? people should be allowed to continue on, because putting a limit appears that you're stopping someone when they're at the height of it. Okay, now I remember my second point, which is that continuation of policies, right?
Okay,
That's the second thing that they always talk about.
Of which we all know how it has been since 2018 until 2026.
So that's the thing. If you...
A plethora of policies to pick from. We didn't have time to see if anything is good or bad, because it's just like, changing like fleetingly.
So they say like 10 years might be the same thing, that policies need time, especially economic policies. It needs time to mature and to see the result of it.
So on the progressives' point of view, what was the intention behind such a proposal? Even though I think the argument could be as, common sense, but still, let's get this out there. What was the thinking behind this push, and why the urgency to execute it now?
Right. Common sense, yeah? I would like to push back on that, because I don't see that being such a common view among people today. Maybe for people like us who may be more aware of the pros and cons of things. So when we talk about why certain segments of population in Malaysia is pushing for this, I think the biggest argument that I've seen and I've heard is that they went through that period of strong leadership, centralized leadership, personalized leadership, and they don't want a repeat of that. Because on the other hand, we hear people saying, what's wrong with that, right? Like we just discussed earlier. But from those who lived through those periods, we saw how it erodes democratic rights and whatnot. So we want to institutionalize prime ministerial term, basically, right? So that it doesn't get out of hand as it did before. And more than that, more closer in time to us, we saw what happened with Datuk Sri Najib with 1MDB. So a lot of people wants to avoid a repeat of that, definitely, right? It's not just Tun Mahathir, we saw 1MDB as well. So these are all of the things that are playing in our mind that we want to avoid for the future of Malaysia.
We need to move on to the next subject, but before we do that, what is the probability of this getting passed in the Parliament? As I am made to understand it, it does require an amendment to the Constitution, therefore 2/3. Do you think that this administration can get 2/3 support to get this bill passed?
In my opinion, they can, because the thing is, I don't see much being said out there. On the opposition side, yes, initially there were some pushback, but it's not to the point where they won't support it. I think one of the latest things was about saying, okay, we can support this, but you have to have other kind of reforms as well. Before this, they were talking about making sure the Prime Minister could not also be the Finance Minister. So from those things that they've said, I look at it positively, that there might be support. And I think the thing is, they're not going to... they're going to support in principle. So how they negotiate with the government is another thing.
But say, for instance, in the UK, where the Chancellor of the Exchequer was never also carrying the role of the Prime Minister, I'm not too sure. Is it a law there in the UK, where the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Prime Minister is meant to be separate, or by tradition they just don't do that?
I believe it must be a law, because I'm more familiar with the American political side. But yeah, I believe it's a law, because it has to be different people for that. Yeah.
For that particular role. Okay, let's now move on to the more much debated bill, which is the separation of the public prosecutor along with the Attorney General. The Attorney General, of course, the role is to advise the government on legal matters, acts on behalf of the government when it comes to legal views and legal proceeding, leads the Attorney General chambers, and of course, how it's organizing itself. And of course, the prosecutor or the Solicitor General, for instance, in that particular role, prosecutes people, and that role is actually quite critical, because it also means to prosecute their bosses, if it comes down to that.
Yeah.
And currently it is together, and as I made to understand it, it is of course a hereditary or inherited role when we were seeking independence, taking the shape and form of, say, for instance, India and Indian rule, which is of course based on the UK rule. But of course, India has since separated it some decades ago, the UK as well, but Malaysia has not done that. So if we were to truly say, emulate those kind of roles and separation of roles, it's high time that Malaysia does that. But then there is also the urgency and the push for it to be done ASAP.
Yep.
And that is where the pushback happens, especially from the PKR10. And their argument is on the mechanics and the details of it. Could you help us understand in terms of, first of all, from a political scientist standpoint, is this a reform policy that is good to be done? That's the first. Second is, how can it be done in Malaysian context, I suppose?
Right. Is it good to be done? I mean, maybe you're asking the wrong person. I believe I'm a Democrat. So I believe, yeah, it has to be done. It has to be done because of the conflict of interest that you mentioned, right? So it's for the betterment of Malaysia as a whole, for the nation as a whole. How can you have a person that advises the government that also could possibly prosecute, like you said, their own bosses if need be? And it's not just about that. They also have the power to not prosecute. Right? So that's something else.
So action and inaction as well.
Exactly. So we have to think about that. So from my point of view, definitely, if you're thinking about the future of democracy in Malaysia, what's best for the people, yes, we have to go for that. What's the second question just now?
The second question is how could it be operationalized, I suppose?
In Malaysia. So that is the more difficult question, because the way that I see it is that this is, on one hand, yes, this is the legal mechanism of doing this. But again, if you're asking me as a political sociologist, what about the people? How does the people view this? Do they understand? Because you can put all the mechanisms in place, but there might be workarounds in a way, or it might work against the people because there are always influences out there that we can't really control. So for me, the best guardrails is for the people. Meaning that we have to develop that democratic culture, that norm, that they see and understand why we need this. Are we there yet? So that is my question. So this is why I see the gap. On one hand, we have like a sort of elites that are pushing for this, but the rest of the people may not care so much about it. And I think this is where, if I may say this on camera, this is where the opposition is playing their role, by saying that, that's why we don't need this so much, because this is not a priority for the people.
And then, of course, it's not just this mechanics on operationalizing these kind of reforms. How does this play when it comes to the political scene? There's a lot that is currently happening in the country. And Sabah Sarawak, for instance, and Sarawak is still adamant on energy arguments and Petros and Petronas that is still currently happening. Sabah has gone on a completely different wavelength. They just need to get off poverty. And the recent state elections have clearly showed that a wholesale rejection of Semenanjung politics is in the air. It really, if we've seen Sabah never being united, this is the case that is uniting them, despite the political spectrum that is currently happening in Sabah. And then, of course, in Semenanjung, we've seen how the East Coast has a completely different take on how politics should be run, and then on the West Coast, where it's completely different. How do you tie these various things that are currently happening on the ground, and how does this tie with us as a fabric of the nation? Are we truly a united nation? Or are we slowly drifting apart and trying to not see each other's point of view even further, I suppose? It's a scary thought, but it is a thought that needs to be had.
Oh, that's a difficult one. To be honest, I do see rising polarization in the country. And it all started in 2018. Like you said, it started with this regional polarization between Semenanjung, Sabah, Sarawak. And also we look, like you said, within Semenanjung as well, right? This polarization between the conservative Malays on the right and I guess the rest somewhere in the center left. So we are polarizing, moving in different directions, and I think this is what makes it difficult for the government to kind of push anything. So that is one pessimistic view, right? Oh my God, how can we really bring everyone to support government policies and issues? But again, I think that we should kind of celebrate this, that this is what we talk about democracy, differences of views, differences of different perspectives. The question now is how do we manage it? So this is why I think the government should play its role in really explaining. So communication plays a big role here. What are their agenda? What are they doing? And how this is good for the people, for the country. But the thing is, a lot of people now have short-term views. So when I talk about politics with people, they're not seeing like 10 years from now, 20 years from now. What do they care about how democracy is in Malaysia, you know?
Short-termism is the biggest risk right now, I suppose.
Yeah, and that is why we have all of these different views, because we have different lived experiences. And the thing is, people run with this. People say, I can't see your point of view, I can't see your point of view. When at the end of the day, we all want to have a better life, better Malaysia. And this is what the government should be doing, I think.
You deal with a lot of young people. It's a challenge that I have never been able to grasp myself. I find young people very difficult, I suppose. But what is their take? What happens in your classrooms? And when you deal with these young scholars, these mahasiswa that we speak of, how do they view the country and the political scene?
To be honest, they're pessimistic. It's been a few years already. I've seen a similar trend. If I talk about trend, right, when I first started teaching about 7-8 years ago, students were a bit optimistic. They're talking about the things that we're talking about today, reform, you know, better Malaysia, more democratic Malaysia. But I see a serious shift in trend. The young ones today that I get in my classes, and these are political science students, so they may be interested or have some knowledge.
Yeah.
They want to go back to a time that they read in their textbook in the 80s and the 90s. They want to go back to that more stable period politically.
Stable, structured. We know where the lines are drawn.
Yes. If before this, what I get from my students is they say, we only have 2 options back then. Barisan Nasional, Pakatan Harapan. They don't like it. They want more options. Guess what? The kids today tell me there are too many options. We don't like it. Having Pakatan, BN, Perikatan, GPS, GRS.
Even within the names that you mentioned, there's slices and dices.
Exactly.
It's like the Boston Tea Party group, you know. There's the Chuck Schumer group, you know, the Democrats and so on.
Yeah. And they don't like this factionalism. They say this is, for them, it's not what democracy or politics is about. Even though I try to, you know, factionalism should be common, because again, these are diverse views. Even within the same party, if you have a big umbrella party, then you should expect factionalism, but they don't like it. So that is my fear for the country, actually. That.
What about, do you supervise postgraduate as well?
I do, yes.
How's their view? What is their view?
Unfortunately, my students are mostly international students, but I could...
Still, I mean, it's a flavour, exactly. It's not just about the national flavour.
Exactly. I could say that they also hold the same view. It depends on nationality, right?
Okay.
Those from India might be a bit more, you know, pro-democracy, because as Muslims, they are struggling in India right now, right?
So the context is very clear. Muslims in India is not facing a good time.
Correct.
It's as simple as that.
But if they're from Turkey, they're happy with the government. They're happy with that so-called stability, that 20 years stable, one party government. So they like that, which is what we experienced before, right? Because when I talk to them, they look up to
Erdogan
and they look up to Malaysia during Mahathir's period, and they see that this is kind of like what we had before. So there is this appetite for kind of strongman leadership that we kind of talked off camera earlier, that they want this sense of, you know, we talk about how the world globally these days are so confusing, so they want that anchor. And if we talk globally, this is also why we're seeing a lot of this rise of right-wing populists, right-wing parties and factions, because people want an anchor.
Do you feel that the temperature is heating up when it comes to domestic politics, and do you feel that a general election is in the air much earlier than we think it would be? Say, for instance, what we scheduled is the parliament to be dissolved in November next year, and a general election must be held no later than, say, February 2028. Okay, that's the schedule or the timeline. But because of what is happening right now, and with the situation that the current administration is facing, are we facing an early election?
Okay, if I may, I see 2 parts to your question. Number one, and I look at the temperature, it's not that hot right now, to be honest. Yeah, in the sense that both sides are dealing with their own internal matters. Perikatan has their own issues, Pakatan has their own issues, PKR has their own issues. So everyone's like focusing on their own agenda and whatnot. So it's not really heating up to the point that we want to go to an election right now. But that's also the reason why we might have an election, because there's a sense of confidence by the incumbent, by the current government, looking at what is going with Perikatan. People are saying they should, seize this moment, and this is how Pakatan Harapan could perhaps get a second term. And don't forget, Barisan Nasional is quiet, but they're quite stable right now. And this is a good time actually for Pakatan and Barisan Nasional to have an election. And also the other argument is that, we want to bring all of the elections coming up together, Malacca, Sarawak, Johor, let's have everything together with the general election. So those are the calculations.
DAP has made it clear that they wanted it, they made it public, that they wanted it together, but I don't see any political leader saying that they want it the same, at least publicly. Privately, I'm not too sure, but yeah. But I think it's only Anthony Loke that's saying that, in terms of what we call this, synchronizing all the elections.
From my perspective, the thing with DAP right now, with let's just say DAP and Anwar, even though it's heating up in public, the way that I view it is they can't really proceed without each other, right? So Anthony Loke is saying all of these things, but can they really survive without PKR within Pakatan Harapan? And like we discussed earlier, Anwar also depends a lot on the support base of DAP. So even though all of these things are playing out right now, I go back to my earlier argument that it's for their own supporters. So while they are, like you say, it looks like it's heating up, but behind the scene, I don't see a strong pressure for the government to kind of do much at this moment.
Final question, Dr. Shazza. When it comes to the populace, do you feel that they want an election, or do you think that they still feel that let's give this administration a little bit more time and let the policies gestate, as we speak of just now? And do you feel that it's also important for us to look at an administration within a 5-year timeline every single time?
Okay, asking about the people, that's the difficult part. If I may tie it back to the polarization that we discussed earlier, so we have all of these different views, of course, right? So, of course, I hear a lot about people asking, dissolve it now because we're not happy with the government right now. Let's have a brand new administration. But don't forget, there's only a segment of Malaysian population. There's those that are saying, no, let this government run its course, give it 5 years.
They have a mandate. That's
exactly.
The thing. Yeah.
So why are you pushing to ask for a new administration? If you're not happy with what's going on, you can just pressure the current government without having a brand new administration every time you're unhappy, right? So that is how I see it, that there's no clear united voice on what the people want at the moment. Okay,
and on the reforms, do you feel that this administration should continue on with the reforms? I mean, separation of AGPP, 10-year limit, but there's so many other reforms that the government is currently doing and wants to do, and should we welcome it?
Yeah, we should. And you were asking earlier about letting the government run for its full term, right? Yeah, I believe so. Like if they were voted in, let them do what they can in the 5 years that they were afforded. And if you don't like them, then you can vote them out, right? That's not a big problem if we believe in this democratic cycle. For the reforms specifically that we talk about, yes, I think they should go on with it, but of course take into consideration all views that are given from within and outside the government, because we want these reforms to actually work. Because especially, if I may add, if we talk about the 10-year limit for the Prime Minister, yes, it looks good on paper, but sometimes we don't talk about the Prime Minister might leave after 10 years, but he might still have influence in other ways. So this is why we have to think of it holistically. The Political Funding Act is very important. So it's a wide reform, and I think the Pakatan Harapan government is serious about it. So let them do their job and see if they can fulfill those promises.
So you feel that it should be read together, for instance, the Political Funding Act, the PM tenureship, curbing the influence of the PM, because nothing is stopping the PM from becoming, say, for instance, the Finance Minister in year 11, say, for instance. I mean, these are all, of course, while it's hypothetical, it's also a realistic scenario to be built upon.
Yes.
And should never be taken into isolation.
Correct, yes.
That means there's a lot of work. I mean, there's a lot of work. It's not just saying, okay, this is a trick and there you go, and done. So it's a long journey, I suppose, for the government to actually embark on. Yeah. Okay, there's, of course, plenty of things to discuss, but our time has come to an end. That was Associate Professor Dr. Shazza Shukri of IIUM. She's also a fellow at the ICS Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore. And of course, if you want to learn more about conversations such as this, you can head on to astroawani.com and find out more there. Till then, thanks very much for watching and goodbye.